16-year-old TAL leaves his queen to be taken for free. Kharkov 1953 USSR Junior Team Championship. Isaak Birbrager versus 16-year-old Mikhail. White had just played knight d2, attacking the queen on f3. And TAL captures a pawn with his bishop on g4, ignoring the attack on the queen. And after knight takes queen on f3, TAL captures the knight, pinning the rook. So how did we arrive at this insane position? Stay tuned as I take you back to the very beginning of the game. d4, knight f6, c4, c5. This is a Benoni defense by TAL. And after e6, white played knight c3. Now let me just show you one quick analysis here. Why didn't white play d6? Can you see why this move is bad? There's a knight e4 move threatening the d6 pawn. And if white tries to defend with bishop f4, queen f6 attacks both the bishop on f4, the pawn on g2, and the pawn on d6 is still under threat. So white is going to lose a pawn without compensation. So let's go back to the game. Knight c3, pawn takes, d6, developing, making room for the bishop to come out. g6, that's the preferred way to develop the black bishop. Black bishop is going to g7, and that bishop is going to be very strong. Knight f3. Now here, instead of knight f3, the engine is given f4. That's the top engine move. So if, for example, black had played bishop g7, then white has this check. And if bishop blocks, then there's this pawn push attacking the knight. And if, for example, pawn takes, there's pawn takes attacking the knight. And if the knight goes to h5, then there's knight f3. But what happens if white plays e6? This move is bad on account of bishop takes c3 check. And after pawn takes, there's bishop takes. And already white has lost a piece here, because even after this, there's not much for white to play here. So in this position, after the knight moves away, the recommended move for white is, instead of playing e6, the move is knight f3. But what happens if white plays bishop takes? Then there's simply knight d7, and black is better. e6 doesn't do anything. There's f takes e6, and after e takes, there's bishop c3, b takes, there's queen check. If g3, there's queen check here. And if queen e2, there's this move. So it's just a lot of wild complications here. But this is better for black. So, but white is not going to do all that. In this position, knight f3 is recommended instead of playing e6, which gives black the advantage. Knight c3 is recommended. And after 0-0, bishop takes d7, knight takes d7, and then g4. So the knight on h5 is going. After bishop takes, there's g takes. So this position basically is better for white, right? So the f4 move had so much tactics and complications. However, white in this position played knight f3. So this is what actually happened in the game. And TAL developed the bishop to g7. So the game continued, normal developing moves. castles, castles. And then Tal played knight a6. The knight is going to b4 to challenge the bishop on d3. Tal played that move. The bishop moved away because you don't want to exchange knight for bishop, leaving black with two bishops, which will become very strong once this position opens up. And then Tal brings his rook into the game, putting pressure on the e4 pawn. And then the knight is attacked. It goes back to a6, and then white plays rook e1. This rook e1 turns out to be on an exposed position. As you see later in the game, there were tactics that were played on this rook on e1. And the question now arises that why didn't white play f3 if he knows he was going to play queen c2? He could have just left the rook on f1 and then played queen c2 with ideas of f3, f4. But after rook e1, Tal now withdrew the knight back to c7. And then white played queen c2, and then Tal played rook b8, preparing to play b5. Now, white played a4, stopping that, and look at how Tal just simply changes his plans and plays b6. This b6 consolidates the black pawns on the queen side and prepares the bishop to have options of coming to a6 or b7, or can even be used to attack on the king side along the c8, h3 diagonal. So here, white plays knight b5. Interestingly, the engine recommended knight c6 at this point. If you look at the d6 pawn for black, it's under a lot of pressure now. There's moves like bishop f4 coming, and then knight b5 can now come. So instead of playing that move, white played knight b5, attacking the a7 pawn. Tal attacks the knight. There was a knight exchange, and after the queen takes, black is now better in this position. So white plays rook a2. Now this rook a2, I was wondering why rook a2? But if you look at this position, the pawn on b2 can come under serious threats, especially when the knight on f6 moves away. You see that dark bishop, how strong it is on that line, black's dark bishop. So my guess is that white wanted to move his rook away from that annoying pin, because the pawn on b3 cannot really move. I mean, on b2 cannot move because there's that diagonal is very strong. So let's see what happens here. Rook a2, and then queen e7. The queen is going to the king side, so it starts with queen e7. So now f3 was now played, and if you notice, this queen e7 is also attacking the e4 pawn. So the queen e7 not only prepares to go to the king side, but is also putting pressure on the f3 pawn. And so this gives white a very difficult option. He's trying to defend the pawn, so he does that with f3. And this f3 was not really recommended. But then what does he do? How does he defend the e-pawn here? So let's continue to see how Tal capitalizes on the f3 move. He first develops the knight, and then after knight g1 by white, bringing the knight to defend the king, Tal plays f5. Now here, white cannot capture the pawn because of this move, check. And after the king moves away, there's this move, attacking the bishop. Attacking the queen. And where does the queen go to? If the queen moves, let's say for example, the queen goes here. Black has so many moves at his disposal. There's b5, even the move bishop f7, for example, is also okay, because if the rook goes to d1, there's queen takes, capturing a piece free. So let's go back to the game and see what actually happened here. After the moves f5, white plays bishop d3, and Tal plays the move f4. This f4 is a very strong move. It blocks the white bishop from coming out. It also prepares black's light squared bishop to join in the attack along the h3 c8 diagonal. And also, very important, the f4 move denies white the opportunity of putting any piece on f3. And so if black's bishop goes to d4 check, there's no piece that can challenge that bishop. You can see black's bishop is very strong. So here, TAL has developed a very strong position and has a very strong positional advantage. Even though material is still equal, but TAL is having a very good advantage at this point. So what does white play? He plays g4. What else does he play? But decides to attack the knight. And TAL ignores that attack on the knight and plays a bishop check. King moves, and then queen goes to h4 with tempo, attacking the rook on e1. So because of this rook attack, white cannot capture the black knight, because if pawn takes knight, there's queen takes e1, queen takes rook. So here, white played rook e2. Interestingly, what if white had played rook queen to e2? There's a very funny move here. I don't know if you can see this move. There's bishop takes pawn. And after f takes g, there's pawn push. And the queen cannot capture because rook f8 comes in, attacking the queen. And if the queen goes back, let's say the queen goes back here, there's rook takes. And if queen takes rook or rook takes rook, what does any move? There's knight g3 and the rook is gone. I mean, the queen is gone. Even if in this position, captured with the rook, this comes in. So the position is just so bad. And if the king moves away here, there's rook f2. Check, and then checkmate next move. So you can see the storms, the kind of attacks that could have happened. So now, in this position, white had played rook e2, and TAL still played the queen to h3. Now here, bishop g4 was still playable. After f takes g, the same f3. And where does the rook go? Cannot go here because it will just be taken freely by the bishop, right? So, and if the rook goes to here, there's queen takes g4. And white is just paralyzed. It's just paralyzed. It can't stop what's about to happen in this game. Meanwhile, in fact, the game is just too bad for what does white play in this position? If, for example, we played b3, queen g1 is mate. So how do you defend the mate in this position? If you go with the knight here, there's bishop takes, still threatening mate. And if rook f2, there's bishop. Either bishop d4 is still playable. You know, the position is just winning for black. So let's go back to what actually happened in the game. So now what you can learn from this is that once you build up a very good positional advantage, it's very easy to have tactics. You can just see the tactics there. The knight was still hanging, and TAL played queen h3, attacking the knight, threatening queen takes knight, mate. So white plays rook g2. And then after TAL captures the pawn, white attacks the queen. TAL goes to e3. The knight goes back to f1, attacking the queen. Tal goes to f3, the knight goes to d1, attacking the queen. So in this position, later on, Tal himself said his older self would have been too scared to play this. But the young Tal played bishop takes pawn. This was the position that we showed you in the diagram, allowing knight to capture and then pawn captures knight. So here, Tal has sacrificed his queen. So what's actually very interesting here is that despite the queen sacrifice, the engine is giving the advantage white as only 1.7, and in some lines 1.3, in some lines 0.9, which means that, you know, the queen advantage, queen for knight and pawn, doesn't really give a true reflection of the actual position on the game. There's still a lot to play for. So here, the rook is pinned. Black is going to win the exchange. He has his pieces facing the king side. There's a dangerous pawn on f4. The rook is going to go to f8. So there's so much to play for black. This game is far from over. So white plays h4. And then after rook f8, white now made a blunder with bishop e2. And Tal checks. After the king moves, he captures the rook. And after queen takes bishop, knight takes bishop, queen takes, there's check, winning back the queen. And after the king captures, there's a check, the king moves, there's a check, the king moves, and then Tal plays bishop f4, exchanging white's bishop to go into a winning endgame. At this point, white resigned. I guess Tal's opponent had had enough and resigned. So this was quite a very interesting game. I like the way Tal played this game. So what I would just like to say is that if you have really found this game interesting, subscribe for more. We'll be showing more games like this. Thank you.